Before we get started with this week's episode, let's play a little game. Can you name the bottle on the screen right now based solely on its silhouette? Time is running out. 3, 2, 1. All right, let's get into the reveal. Boom! Benchmark Foolproof. Curious if you got that right. If you said Benchmark or Benchmark Top Shelf or Benchmark Single Barrel, wrong. You had to say Benchmark Foolproof. Now that we got you warmed up, let's get into this week's episode. Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for joining, everybody. Today, we are going to be tasting history. So we recently dropped a Green River single barrel in collaboration with Dusty Dan's Whiskey Review, Drifting Drams, Top Dog, Renee, Adam, and Eric were there as well. And knowing that we were going to pick a Green River single barrel someday, I have been saving a sample that Dusty Dan provided me of a 1941 Green River Dusty. Absolutely incredible to have this experience, but I'll be able to compare the flavor profile too of what it was almost 100 years ago compared to our barrel pick. And then stick around for the second half of this video where I'm going to go over my top 10 whiskeys and bourbons of the year thus far. Curious what's on that list? Then stick around for the break. Thank you for joining today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. Thanks to this great community, we've had the privilege of picking some amazing barrels over the last year, and we are going to continue that in 2025. Coming up, we will have barrels of Green River, Bardstown, and Old Dominic, with many more on the way. If you'd be interested in getting in on our barrel picks, consider joining our Patreon community to be first in line. We also share barrel pick news with our private Facebook group, link in the description. Come be a whiskey friend and join us on this journey. Super excited to go through today's tasting with you. We are going to go through our recent single barrel release of Green River. So big shout out to Dusty Dan for setting up this pick at Green River. This was a collaboration pick between Hello Again Whiskey Friends, Dusty Dan's Whiskey Review, Drifting Drams, Top Dog Bourbon, and we also had special guests Renee, Adam, and Eric there as well to support. And we walked away with one heck of a barrel, and we'll get into that story into just a moment. The other thing we're going to do in today's video is also compare our barrel pick to a 1941 bourbon from Green River. Sample courtesy of Dusty Dan. You heard that right. 1941, almost 100 years apart between these two whiskeys we're about to compare. Now, pulling up to Green River in Owensboro gave me a totally different appreciation for this brand and all of its history. While this seems like a new brand on the shelf for us today, this is a brand whose history dates back almost 140 years. Thus, one of the things they always put all over their branding is DSP-Kentucky-10. As an example, you'll see it there on the neck tag of every bottle and all over the labels. Now, those DSP codes are essentially serial numbers, which means Green River was the 10th registered distillery in Kentucky, dating back all the way to 1885. They've been able to maintain that DSP all the way through to this modern revival. Now, of course, before Prohibition, whiskey a lot of the times was considered medicinal, and thus they had the tagline, the whiskey without a headache. But unfortunately for them, they did have a fire mishap around 1917, and that caused them to lose essentially all of their barrels, and they had to sell the distillery. So when they sold the distillery post-Prohibition, they changed the slogan to the whiskey without regrets. And that is now the same slogan you can actually see on the top of every bottle. So this dates back all the way to 1933. Now, for that 1933 sale, I was trying to look this up online. I believe they told us that they sold it to Old Medley. And thus, when it comes to this sample that we're going to be getting in later, this would be distillate coming from that post-sale era. The distillery stopped distributing around the 1950s and was pretty dormant until now our modern day. Green River was revived starting in 2014. In 2016, they started producing whiskey again, and now we get to enjoy all of these lovely varietals that are coming out. So that's a little bit of history there leading up to that moment, but I thought it was good context, kind of seeing the history between the sample bottle we'll go through later and the single barrel that we're going to go through now. So we're going to break down the tasting notes of this single barrel. Now, for this single barrel pick, we had to drive through essentially a snowstorm to get our picking crew to Owensboro on time. Quite scary. I kept getting flat tires all the way through, but we pushed through and we weren't going to miss this pick. But essentially everything in the Kentucky area was closed or closing down, but Green River stayed open for us. Now on this pick, this is an exciting thing too, especially when it comes to our pick teams. We are very, very passionate about whiskey and we are very open with each other, communicating our likes and dislikes. And this was an example where they laid out 5 good whiskeys for us to try, but just none of them were clicking with the group. So we worked with Green River. We asked if we could sample a few more, see if we can find something more in our profile range. He was understanding where we were gravitating towards based on our tasting notes and the conversations of the room, brought out 2 more barrels for us to try. And one of those was the unanimous winner that we're going to be drinking here tonight. But it's a very important thing for those people that are picking barrels and going through. You got to pick something that you love and that you're proud of. And if it's not resonating with you, work with the brand and see if you can find something. Now, some brands will work with you. Some brands won't in that situation. Some are just take it and leave it. So big shout out to Green River for helping us out here and giving us the opportunity to select this amazing barrel. So now let's get into this one. We're going to go into the nose, the palate, into the finish, go through the tasting notes. And once again, if you have this at home, please let us know what you think about it in the comments. And as of recording, this one is not sold out yet. So if you are interested in the whiskey that we're going over today, it is still on Sealbox. All you need to do is search Whiskey Friends, and you should be able to find the Green River Single Barrel. Personally speaking, and of course I am biased, I do think this is my favorite Green River Single Barrel to date. And I've got about 8 thus far in the basement with many other samples that I've gotten the chance to try. Why do I love it so much? Let's get into it. Cheers, everybody. Oh, man. On the nose, keep bouncing back and forth. Dan was the first one to call this out. A rhubarb pie. Pie crust on this thing for days and days and days. Now, I think it does sway more cherry than, say, the rhubarb, but I do get the angle that he is coming at. For me, it's more of a spicy coffee cake with some cherries inside it. On the nose, there's also a surprising amount of oak influence, and it even drifts into a sweet tobacco. So combining all of the spiciness from those baking spices, either interpreting that as the pie crust or the coffee cake, transitioning to the oak, the cherry, all the way to that sweet tobacco. It has every single note that I love about Green River. All right, let's get into the taste. Cheers, everybody. Oh, man. Super rich, creamy mouthfeel. And man, did that cherry really pop me in the face on that first sip. This is actually my first sip of the day. That was some intense cherry. But one thing I do love to show, especially when it shows up that well in the glass, I mean, you can just see how rich and oily that is. This is what Ethan refers to as not just legs, but stretch marks. And you can just see the oils running on there. That has actually been a pretty standard characteristic of anything that we pick. If it doesn't have that mouthfeel, which then usually translates to a very strong finish, it usually doesn't get past this pick team. All right, let's get into mid palate. Oh my gosh, it's so good. So mid palate. Oh my gosh, that finish. Stopping me in my tracks. I need to talk about whiskey, but the finish keeps going on. Oh, okay. I'm going to need to go another sip now. Jeezy Pete. Man, this thing is punching me in the face mid palate. So up front, when it initially hits your palate, it's all cherry and vanilla. But when you do let it transition to mid palate, oh my gosh, those baking spices I was talking about, the nose, they come punching, and it gives you all of that coffee cakey goodness at the same time with the cherry. And then there's quite a bit of oak there sitting as well. Then as we get into that long, lengthy finish, spice continues, cherry continues, oak continues as well. But what I really, really love on the finish is that it has this transition and this brightness start coming in. First is some vanilla, but then as that sweet tobacco. Not a note that you get very often, especially on a product that is 6 to 7 years old. And even now, as I'm talking through it, I'm still getting waves of vanilla and that tobacco as well. And that is what I loved about this particular single barrel selection. I've had Green Rivers that have had the cherry note. I've had Green Rivers that have had the baking spice. And I've had Green River that has had the tobacco. But really, I've only had 1 or 2 barrels that have been able to bring all of those flavor profiles together and not lean in one direction or the other, just actually bring it all together as a cohesive barrel. and that is in this sip. So self-serving as it may sound, thus far, this is my favorite thing out of Green River, and I absolutely love this whiskey. So if you like the sound of that, hey, go see if there's any left on Sealbox. Once again, you can search Whiskey Friends. And if you're interested in the picks that we're doing, be sure to follow us either on Patreon or on our private Facebook group. Links in the description. I'm going to take a quick break and then let's get into the 1941 bourbon. All right, now it's time to step through time and into history here. Almost 100 years ago, this was distilled, but Dusty Dan provided me a sample of this 1941 Green River that he got his hands on. Now, I had the pleasure of trying this before. Todd Ritter over there at the Bourbon Road podcasts. Be sure to check out the Bourbon Road wherever you listen to podcasts. But he won this as well, and him and I did a little tasting of this a couple months ago. Now, one of the things that impressed about that particular tasting is that it did not come across overtly as a quote-unquote dusty bourbon. It actually came across as more modern. So that was something that was very interesting to us. And a lot of the flavor profile actually had some similarities to what we're used to today. So let's quickly go through history here and let's see what Green River tastes like almost 100 years ago compared to that single barrel selection from Dusty Dan Whiskey Reviews. Hello again, whiskey friends, drifting drams, and all of our friends. Cheers, everybody. Let's get into this one. Oh my gosh. Tell you what, that dusty note is there. I know I just made that comment, but it was there on the nose more so than I remember from when I was talking with Todd. And what's interesting too, it's almost like a cherry root beer is almost what I would describe as the flavor profile here. So the fact that the cherry is still part of the Green River DNA as it was 100 years ago is something that really does intrigue me. Yeah, root beer and some like nice vanilla too. So you're almost getting into like almost a root beer float kind of a vibe. Let's get into the taste. Gorgeous, gorgeous whiskey. Lovely, lovely mouthfeel. Up front, really bright, vanilla leaning, almost like a natural vanilla ice cream, melted down a little bit. That root beer note continues to play through as well. And it is so oily as well. I mean, look at that one. Now, our first one was barrel proof by comparison, but now you take a look at this. Transition to mid-palate brings back that cherry note, but for the most part, you're talking about the cherry and the vanilla doing most of the work throughout this as if it was the inside of a cherry cordial. And then the finish leaves you with the vanilla and that nice, lovely, dusty old wood. Very, very fun pour and fun to compare these two bourbons almost 100 years apart. So thank you for joining the first half of today's video. If you have any questions about the barrel pick, let us know in the comments. If you've gotten a chance to have it, let us know what you think of the comments. We're going to need word of mouth to move those last couple of cases there. And we are so excited to add a Green River single barrel to our portfolio of single barrels over the last year. Man, it has been quite a ride up to this point, and we have a lot more coming out in 2025 if you're interested. Let's move on to the next segment. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. Before we move on to the next segment, I want to give a shout out to our friends, Katie and Ethan, over there at the Drifting Drams Coffee Company. Fancy coffee for regular people. Katie and Ethan are going to be giving away a $15 gift card to Drifting Drams Coffee Company. So leave a comment with the hashtag Drifting Drams to enter, and be sure to come back next week and see if you won. And big shout out to this week's winner, coming off the top rope, Travis Robeson. Congratulations, buddy. Be sure to get with us in the comments to claim this week's gift card. Good luck, everybody, for next week. Whenever there's a question from the community or a topic you're interested in, we love covering it here. Let's see this week's topic. Welcome back from the break, everybody. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe. And if you're interested in that Green River, don't sleep on it. We'll push to get those last bottles out there as quickly as we can. Now, for the second half of today's video, we are going to talk about my top 10 favorite whiskeys reviewed thus far this year. On this list, I will include some samples of bottles that I'm also hunting because of those reviews. But for the most part, these will be bottles that I have personally purchased and or intend to purchase. And it can only be in my top 10 at the end of the year if I have it in my whiskey collection. Now, 2025 has been an interesting year so far. It seems like I have been drinking really good whiskey consistently throughout the year, really avoided buying any disappointments, but also haven't really hit things that are scoring as high as some of the bottles on last year's top 10 list. So lacking standouts, but at the same time, having consistently good whiskey. Another thing to note is that our own barrel picks aren't allowed to be on these lists, even though I probably drank those the most of anything on this list comparatively. It's really hard when you are picking your own barrels not to gravitate towards those on the weekends, but this is the game that we signed up for. So let's get into this top 10. Number 10. All right, we're going to start this list at the score of an 80 overall. And this is a bottle that has become my new house bourbon in 2025. The Pendleton 10-year bourbon here, 1910. This is 10-year, 90 proof. MGP, can get it as low as $40 in some places. But love that the big age statements are returning. And for this particular release, this brings back shades to early in my bourbon journey, dating back to 2018, when the Boone County 1833 was my favorite go-to, but didn't realize at the time that it'd be falling off the shelf forever and then not being replaced by any other brand until Pendleton here came out with this 10-year. The other good thing is the price on this one, ringing in at $40. Back in 2018, I used to buy that Boone County for $55 and had no regrets about it. But the oak on this one is quite balanced and the main event, but it does have the honey and the graham cracker that I love from this era of MGP as well. Number 9, also coming in at a score of an 80, is this release from Evan Williams, the 1783 2025 edition of the American Hero. If you see these on the shelf, they cost the same as the other 1783 releases that has a black bottle, but these American flag themed bottles do stand out and are very impressive. The barrels that went into this batch were actually selected by a group of veterans, and that process of picking some of the barrels that go into the batch does make this stand out versus the regular release. For just $20, you get some lovely oak, a little bit of raspberry cream, some cookie, and a whole lot of vanilla. I truly think this is the best budget bourbon that you can get on the shelf. And this year lives up to that promise as well. Number 8. This one might be controversial for the list for some people, but we're gonna stick with Heaven Hill. And coming in at an 84 out of 100, we have the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, the A125 edition. While this batch doesn't live up to many of the other batches, it's still a really good bourbon, especially for the price. This one leaned more into brown sugars, peanuts, and even some sauteed butter, and even has a finish similar to what I was talking about with the 1783, with some raspberry and some vanilla. Overall, I thought this was a nice blend of sweetness and oak, and while the series hasn't had that true hitter in a couple years, I'm still not ready to give up on these releases yet, because even if they won't be in my top 10 at the end of the year, they are great whiskey to enjoy and share with friends. Number 7, at a score of an 84 as well, we've got a new release coming out of New Riff. This is a brand that I've seen getting more recognition this year than prior years. But we got the 2025 Silver Grove. Now, this is a batch release that New Riff has been releasing at the distillery for the last couple years, which each release has its own unique qualities. At only 4 years old and $55, this bourbon brought a lot of baking spice and rye spice mid-palate to give you a good pop, but accompanied that with some nice chocolate and honey. So it gives you that sweet and spicy in only a way that New Riff can. Number 6. All right, scores are getting a little higher, and now we're getting into official certified gold territory. So anything that scores above an 86 in our scoring system gets a stronger recommendation from the channel. And when it does come to our end of year lists, all the whiskeys on that will need the certified gold to be in our top 10. So it'll be interesting to see if this one holds on. This is one of the biggest surprises of the year for me so far in the best of ways. And I'm talking about the Remus 9-year experimental. So what makes this bourbon unique is that it was actually aged in casks that were intended for wine. And those different casks really do change the overall profile of the bourbon. I equated this bourbon to a baked Alaska, essentially with the meringue on top that was nicely charred, layers of cake, ice cream, cream in general, giving you that decadent dessert. But then on the finish, there's also some lovely tobacco, oak, and walnut. So a very, very unique whiskey, especially for something coming out of Ross and Squibb. And if this is the start of their experimental series, we are in for some treats going forward. The thing I loved about this the most too, this cost me $80 in Ohio, whereas the Remus Repeal the price kept going up, dipping up over 100. They at least introduced this experimental series at a reasonable price for something that is 9-year age stated and 107 proof. Definitely not one to sleep on. Number 5. All right, we're going to stick in the same range with a score of an 86, coming from one of my favorite master blenders in the game today. This one is the K-Luke Batch 11. And I do think this is my favorite batch so far, having had about half of the batches myself. What I loved about this whiskey was just how balanced and gorgeous it was up front. You can tell that a lot of care went into construction, particularly with the mouthfeel. There's this lovely balance of oak, fruits, caramel, even a little bit of coffee cake. And then in that transition to mid-palate, some delicious chocolate Rolos. On the finish, I even started thinking about a root beer float. Think of all the variety of flavors there. That's one heck of a blend. Number 4, still sitting there at a score of an 86. We are now getting into a fabulous release from Evernorth Spirits, the Night Stalker Batch 4. So this one is probably my favorite blend coming from the Bourbon Junkies and Evernorth thus far. It's a blend of Green River and MGP. The Green River is between 6 to 7 years old, and the MGP side goes all the way up to 11 years. The other interesting thing about this is that the MGP that they used when it comes to those older casks was actually 99% corn. So essentially the same distillate that they use in their light whiskeys, but aged in new oak barrels. What surprised me about this blend was the fruits that pop off of it. Comes across as a medley of different stone fruits, apricots, cherries, all mixed together into a jam. But then with those fruits, you get waves of baking spices, rye spice, butterscotch, caramel, white chocolate, just waves and waves of dessert flavors too. And all of that continues all the way through to a lovely, lovely finish. And the best part about this is that Evernorth always keeps those prices at a very reasonable range. You get all of that at cask strength for a $75 bottle. Can't wait to see what Evernorth has in store for us as the year goes on. Number 3. So at number 3, I still have it graded at an 86, but I have spent more time with this bottle than any other bottle on the list. And I would love to bump it up to an 87 or an 88 in my spreadsheet. I still might do that before the end of the year because this is one heck of a good bourbon and is actually my favorite bourbon of the year thus far. So we're getting into the Horse Soldier 10-year single barrel. Now, the one I have in my hand is coming from the Party Source that is by me. Big Vic helped me get one from K&L, which I graded about an 85. And Big Vic also provided a sample of a Hazbat that he got from Vegas. I'd put that one at a 90. So thus far, that is my range on these single barrels, but I'm going to keep exploring these single barrels as I can find them from different stores. But what I continue to equate this to, these taste like essentially 10-year versions of the Lucky 7 proprietors that came out a few years ago. The general flavor profile is very similar. You get a lot of creme brulee and raspberry cream, but then all of that custard is balanced by this lovely, lovely velvety oak. And then by the time you get to the finish, a little bit of cherry starts shining through. So, so good. I have actually bought quite a few whiskey friends this particular bottle because I keep recommending it. So if you are in Northern Kentucky by Party Source, don't sleep on this one. And in general, don't sleep on this brand when it comes to the 10-year single barrels. Probably one of the biggest tips I can put out there in 2025 thus far. I don't hear a lot of other channels talking about this, but this is my sleeper of the year. Number 2. All right, coming in at an 87. This is the only one where I don't have the bottle to show you. This was a sample from our whiskey friend Jonathan, but Darrell and I tag teamed this review and we were head over heels on this pour. And I included it on today's list because I do intend to find one and buy it if I can get it for MSRP. But at number 2 is the Penelope 17-year light whiskey. Now, what makes this one so interesting to me is that the Penelope 15-year light whiskey that came out last year was actually one of my biggest disappointments of 2024, mainly because they released it at about 120 proof, and I am just so used to getting 13-year, 14-year, 15-year light whiskeys from brands like Obtainium or Bull Run at half the cost at cask strength. So expectations were low when I got to try this Penelope 17-year, but they kept the price the same at $100 to $120, and they upped the proof up to 138, and it packs quite a flavor punch. Based off memory, I was getting all of these dried strawberries in addition to the honey and the graham cracker and the vanilla and all the characteristics I expect from a light whiskey. But as you now get into these 17 years, the oak presence starts to linger as well. Even though it was aged in used casks, you can really start feeling it at this level of age. So hopefully I can add the Penelope 17 year to my collection so we can see where it ranks by the end of the year. Number 1. All right, all comes down to this. Now, I do expect this one to be in my top 10 of the year with a score of an 88. And we are still keeping the focus on light whiskey. Seelbach 20-year release coming in at 142 proof. This was a big splurge bottle for me. Ran me $200. But I took the chance on it because I have never had a light whiskey with a 20-year age statement before. And as you can see, that gamble paid off, being my highest rated whiskey of the year thus far. What really got me on this one was first, impeccable mouthfeel. It is so rich and oily, but it was the fruits that shine through, which isn't something that I always say about a light whiskey. I was getting shades of tangerine, even mango up front. And all of the fruits in there were essentially glazed, almost like the fruits on top of a tart dessert. As you get past the fruits, I go then into elephant ears or funnel cake covered in brown sugar and powdered sugar. And then by the finish, all of that barrel influence shows up, and you also get some nice waves of vanilla. For sure, one of the best light whiskeys I have ever had. And that is the top 10 whiskeys I've come across thus far in 2025. Interested to hear your opinion. Any of these that you disagree with? Is there anything I didn't mention that you think should be on the list? Maybe there's something that I need to make sure I check out. So let me know what you think of all of this in the comments. Be sure to check out our Green River single barrel. Over on Seelbach, you can search for it using the term Whiskey Friends. And just remember, while you can always find more whiskey, you can never have enough whiskey friends. So take care of those around you, and we'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye, buddy. Shout out to our Patreon family. Couldn't do this without you. Please be sure to hit that like and subscribe. And if you're interested in checking out our barrel picks, check out our Patreon and our private Facebook group in the description. And we'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye, everybody.